Yeah, I think Steichen's life is pretty well known and documented. Again, kind of an inner circle, great early photographer, someone who mentored a lot of other people, brought others along for the ride. But yeah, Steichen, there were a number of different interesting things he did photographically. I do have a monograph of his next to me, so I might pull a couple of those out too. But um, he really delved into it's not particular to this image, but organic form. He was one of the first to really start to take that kind of to the next level for photography, and we can show some examples of that. But yeah, this image is really well known of his oeuvre, and I think it's one that's interesting because um, he there's several things going on here. So first of all, choosing to do this at night again, I have to emphasize how long the exposure time would have been on this. Just from a technical perspective, knowing how slow the speeds generally were of the kind of image making material that was had at that time. Even today on film, this would have to be a many second, maybe multi-minute exposure, or a digital camera too. I mean, whatever, right? But to get it kind of properly exposed, you need a long time if it's just as the moon is rising. And so he obviously again would have scouted this. He's going to come there at a certain time. He thinks to himself, I want just the very top edge of the moon to start appearing over the horizon, so I need to be there and set up early and so on. But then some of the compositional choices here, to use the reflecting pool, gives this very like meditative but also melancholic type feel to it. This sets a bit of a precedent for someone like an Ansel Adams and so many other landscape photographers later to really zone in on things like reflections and the power that can have in an image. But somehow, and I'm not sure what the story is behind this, there's someone who probably know better than me, he gets a little bit of color in here, right? This blue coloration. I mean, unless this particular version that we're looking at, but this is from the Museum of Modern Art, so I have to imagine it looks pretty darn close to the actual photograph. So I'm not sure if he did, some post-processing to try to draw this blue twilight color out of the sky a bit, but I think that was also unique at the time. And yeah, I mean, anything you want to say about this one?
Yeah. This is the one that immediately was a standout for me. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. We have, we have clearly the horizon line, right, where the moon is going to be, but it's a horizon line that is just kind of probably built up on account of these are just hills, right? It's not like necessarily the most natural horizon line. We have a curved version of that here, right, with the pool, right, starting here, going back up there. Then we have multiple other ones going the other direction, right, just kind of interfering with that before you get to the actual horizon. So, in terms of composition, that's definitely pretty different. The fact that we don't get to see the tops of the trees, right? They are cut off by the photo. And yet, because we have this reflective pool of light, we do get to see the tops of most of these trees, or at least half of them, being reflected in the pool, right? So in that way, like he's able to avoid superfluous information, right? He's able to say, I'm going to end this where it's necessary, right? Because if you're thinking like of all the ways that this could have been done, if you wanted to like show the tops of the trees up there as well as in the pool, well, you'd probably have to cut off this entire bottom, right? And just we were talking about earlier, like imagine if certain things get eliminated from a photograph. I think there would definitely be a loss if you get rid of like this bottom, third or quarter or whatever it is. Partly because I mean, like, look, in terms of like just establishing some sort of variety, like in this photo, here you have something that is completely like unreflective and is also very kind of, even ground. Doesn't seem to be, too many rocks, too much grass, too much whatever, unlike everything else, right? Which has like a lot of stuff going on, right? In a weird way, like the stillness right? That's being reflected in the pool, like, and likely this is still water. That is also just kind of being emphasized by the emptiness, right, at the bottom there. So anyway, just a lot of like interesting stuff happening in this photo, and also just like you see the moon, right, the moonrise there, right, and the blue around it. But here in the bottom, right, again, talk about like no superfluous information. It's sort of, missing here, right, from the bottom, right. That's also an interesting kind of, it's a coincidental thing. I mean, that's just the way that it happened, but that's an interesting thing to have happened.
Yeah. I've got a monograph here of Steichen, so I can show just a couple other examples, because that was, kind of a hallmark of his style, right? This is another very famous image of his of the Brooklyn Bridge, right? And it's got some of those same elements of, some large empty spaces, and really, if you look at it closely, there's not a whole lot of information conveyed other than the dark form of the bridge and a few lights along there. Some of his others, like this cityscape, another very famous one of his, the Flatiron Building, right? This one, you've got this branch that intrudes, you've got the building, you've got people down here along the street, and some lights. This one was also after a rain, it looks like, because there's some reflections on the sidewalk. So even in his portraiture, he had a lot of these like impressionistic styles, very much contributing, right? He's just content with big open black spaces, and kind of the same way maybe a painter or draftsman would do, would just leave things open. This portrait here on this side, right? There's just not a whole lot going on in the detail other than the face itself and the light that falls on it. So, his landscapes, this was a hallmark of how he went about it. Here's the Garden of the Gods from Colorado. It's, the clouds probably take center stage, and then a couple monolithic shapes, and again, mostly black. I mean, maybe in person on a print of this, you'd see more shadow detail, but he took and heightened some of the drama of these landscapes with that style.
Portraits are really good too.
Yeah, a lot of gorgeous portraits. Now, I mean, the people he took photographs of, right? I mean, it's J.P. Morgan and Condé Nast and Richard Strauss. I mean, he was plugged into artistic and like high society. So that gave him access to, to some of these people. Here's maybe one final landscape to look at. This was at Versailles. But again, look at how little information is really imparted there. I know there's a reflection, but like, again, almost entirely black except for that mid-ground white of the building and then some of the gray in the sky. It's just a different take, I think, than a lot of people had at the time. He's doing portraitures of presidents, right? He's got Theodore Roosevelt and Howard Taft, right? So he was out and about, certainly kind of a photographic celebrity of that time. Yeah, so let me just show a couple of these like more banal images in a way, but he's one who kind of pushed for anything could make a great photographic subject. It's up to the photographer to visualize this, right? So here's a seashell and the way that spiral, and I'm sure the way he lit that, of course, was a really conscious choice. He's got things like the backbone and ribs of a sunflower. So there's like the classic sunflower over here, but then this, I think, is by far the more interesting image, right? Where the way that this looks, he's making it look like a human form in certain ways. Just really, really zoomed in macro close-ups of flowers. So these were things that he began to do and bring to the forefront. These are from the 1920s. So probably some photographers have been working with some of those ideas, but he really took it to the heights. So he's got cityscapes in here, plenty of portraits. Shout out to a great poet here, Carl Sandburg, and his wife. Took a portrait of them.
Yeah, he had a couple of Sandburg photos that I saw.
Yeah. So, and he did a fair amount of fashion photography too. And again, pretty much in any way that you could have been well known as an artist in this medium, he did it. So, a big time figure, no question. Got Eugene O'Neill here with a very kind of ominous portrait. Right.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just surprising how absolutely modern, right? So many of these photographers are, right? Just kind of like almost from the beginning. And again, like you have to ask yourself, like, to what extent does art regulate itself, generate its own rules, in a way that's just kind of obvious enough to like just certain amount of people, right? It's obvious enough to them where they just kind of pick it up and go with it, right? Very quickly they realize that, these photos are photos, but we could manipulate them, and it's okay to do so, right? It's okay to be even, more strangely selective in your discretionary process, right? Because again, what we primarily have is essentially everything that we exclude, right? And everything that we include. This is kind of exactly what the boundaries are for this, since, the thing that's preventing you is just whether or not you click a button.